Hey guys, today I'm going to go through the settings on the Nikon D300s and show you what I think are the best settings on this camera. Now this is just my opinion. I'm not asking you to change your settings, but rather a guide for those who might need help. These are the settings that I use. You can choose to use whatever you like, but when I show you these settings, I'll be giving you an explanation of why I chose them and to help you better understand the science of your camera. So let's get started. Okay, so I got the D300S here and I'm going to show you the settings. Basically, I'm going to show you what I have for the settings and kind of give you an explanation of what each setting is and help you understand how this camera works. So here we go. Okay guys, so if you're new to using this camera, you're going to basically want to know how to set this thing up so it's the most user-friendly to you when you're shooting pictures. So the first menu that we have here is the playback menu. Alright, so I don't have a memory card in this camera, so you're not going to see some of these right here. These are all blacked out or grayed out, meaning that I can't use them, but basically that's what you're going to see on the back of your D300S when you get yours going. I go into display mode here and I go ahead and program this how I like. So these different settings are for your own convenience. It's so you can set it up so then you can see different things on your screen after taking a picture. You have your focus point, of course, your highlights, your RGB histogram. If you like to use histograms, you could definitely do that. And then the data is, we go down, data displays camera settings at the time of the photograph was taken, including metering, exposure, and focal length. So basically that's like your metadata, and it's going to show you basically everything that you used when you took that picture. So if you're previewing your picture in your camera, it's going to show you everything that you did when you took that picture. So that's kind of handy to have that. And you can also scroll through this little button up and down when you take your picture. If you want to preview it, it's going to basically show you all the different modes, so you can go through it. Let's see here. Rotate images. If I take my a tall picture, say a portrait picture, I can have it rotated, and that will show you right here. If on a selected image is taken with on selected for auto image rotation in a setup menu will be rotated for display duration. During playback, images are not rotated for display in the monitor immediately after shooting. So when you're previewing your picture after you take it, not directly after, but if you hit the preview button up here and you look at your picture, it should rotate the image. So that's also nice too, so you don't have to tilt your camera sideways to look at the image. So that's pretty much it for that. You can do image review. That's image review. When I have a memory card in this, it would be white. Is basically the image comes on after you take the picture on the screen, so then you can see what you took a picture of. If you don't care for that, you can turn it off. So, and then you can name your playback folder, anything like that. So let's go into the next menu, which is the camera. And now this is, you can create certain shooting banks. This is handy if you want different modes. If you want this menu to shoot in different ways, you can have a particular setup for if you're doing portraits, if you're doing landscape photography, if you're doing macro photography, or certain, if you're running a studio, for instance, this is a good way to set up different things. So if I go into this, it should tell me store shooting menu settings in one or four names. Named banks A, B, C, or D to be recalled as desired. So basically, it's like a memory. You can use that to set up when you're shooting in different scenarios. So that's handy. Let's go back. Let's see, reset shooting menu. No, that's if you want to reset everything. So then it's all back to normal. And then the shooting bank menu is for these settings, these custom settings. See how it says custom setting bank? And we'll get to that in a second. Basically, I'll show you all the settings there. You go back in the camera because that's where you're on. So we don't want to do that unless you want to reset the whole entire camera back to like normal. And let's see, file name, that's, you can name your file name anything you want. Now since this camera has compact flash for memory card selection, you can select that, or you can use your SD card. I personally like my SD card because I also use SD cards. I have bought an adapter for this camera so that I can put another SD card in it, so that's awesome. So then you can select your primary slot as that one if you'd like to. And then what you can do is after you buy that adapter, which goes into the compact flash slot, so you can put an SD card, you can change your modes either to overflow your pictures, so then you have an abundance of space if you run out on your first card, or you can use your secondary slot function for backup. So then in case your first memory card fails, it will be backed up onto the other card. Or what you can also do, which is pretty cool, you can put this camera into the mode where it will use one memory card for RAW and the second memory card for JPEGs. So say you're taking pictures of portraits and you have to send out proofs to a client or something like that. You would want to use the second memory card for JPEGs. That way they're all set up. You don't have to go through it and select them and all that stuff. It's a little bit easier of a process if you have one card just set up with JPEGs if you're doing it that way. That's something that's nice. Another cool thing in this camera, let's see here. Now, here's an image quality. Now, this camera has a lot of different shooting modes for your image quality. Of course, it has RAW, JPEG, and all the fine settings for JPEG. But it also has TIFF. Now, TIFF, if we go into the question mark thing here, it'll show you that TIFF is an uncompressed, is an uncompressed 8-bit TIFF RGB. That's what TIFF is. Uncompressed 8-bit TIFF RGB. So basically, it's uncompressed. Now, this only shoots in 8-bit, I think. So let me clarify a little bit. When you're shooting in TIFF, it is 8-bit color. When you're shooting in RAW, you're using a 12-bit color mode, and if changed in camera, you can use a 14-bit color mode, and everything is uncompressed. In 14-bit mode, the file size gets much bigger because there's more data per color channel. It also slows down your FPS because of the time it takes to process the image. So always keep that in mind if you switch it into 14-bit. Now TIFF is uncompressed, but so is RAW. TIFF is just basically a file that will also give you a lot of information, just like a RAW image. Alright, so now we're going to go back, and I'm going to go back into what other settings I have. Your image size. So then we go down, and you see that image size is of course blacked out. That's if you're shooting JPEGs with your RAW images, or just JPEGs by themselves. This is to set up your JPEG compression. And this is basically just showing you choose how JPEG's images, fine, normal, and basic will be compressed. Okay. And go into it, and then you can change your size priority, and then you can do optimal quality. Yeah, it's just, you can turn it on. And then of course NEF RAW recording. Now this is kind of cool. I like this. Now this I can change. So I could go to type, and then I can go to lossless compressed, compressed, and what is lossless compressed? Let's see what that is. Okay, lossless compressed NEF images are compressed using a reversible algorithm that reduces file size by about 20 to 40%. Now, I don't like to use that because I don't like my images compressed at all. I don't, because I like to have all the image data that I can get out of this image, out of the image that's taken, so that I can actually do whatever I want with it, and so I can edit it however I want, and so if I need to crop, I can. When you're taking pictures, you want to use the highest settings that you possibly can with no compression, or what I mean is that you don't want compression at all. That's kind of the rule when taking pictures. You can use JPEG if you really have to, but I wouldn't recommend it because it compresses the images too much and you lose a lot of the data that you get with your sensor. You're basically not using your sensor's full potential, and that is not the greatest thing. So another thing this camera has, let me go back, is NEF RAW bit depth. It says choose a bit depth for NEF RAW images. So if I go into this 14-bit, usually it's at 12, but I go into 14-bit. It says 14-bit images are recorded at this 14-bit depth, creates larger files for finer definition. So basically I get more out of the image when I use 14-bit. The image size will be a lot bigger, but it will give me the full potential of the sensor. And I want that to use that because that's going to give me all the potential that this sensor has to give me. And that's exactly why you bought the camera, because it has the sensor. Now, back when this camera was released, 12 point, I think it's 12.2 or 12.3, I forget how many megapixels this camera is right off. I'll put it on the screen. It was a big deal because the bigger cameras would use a 12 megapixel sensor, like the Nikon D300s and also the Nikon D200s, which is actually surprising because that's an older generation camera. Just give you a little bit of a history lesson in that. So NEF RAW recording in this, I believe the files were pretty dang big, if I don't remember, and I had to stop using that at the moment, like for a little bit, because my hard drive space was very small. Back then, a terabyte hard drive was a lot more expensive than it is today. So, good thing things have come down in price, right? Now, as far as white balance goes, I like to choose my own color temperature, and it's usually, I like around 5600K because that's daylight. Now, you can choose whatever you would like, but I would use whatever you think is the closest to what I would just use anything you can that's close enough to daylight, and that's 5600K. Some people like to use cloudy. You can always change it in Adobe Camera Raw if you're using Photoshop. Set picture control. I use vivid because I feel like it gives me the most colorful picture from this camera. That's my own preference. Now, if you want a picture that is basically just, raw and it gives you a very blah color, I would say use standard, and then you can basically add all the colors in that you want. Now, that's not a bad idea, to be honest. That way you can actually add what you want. Vivid already has color in it. I just think it gives it a nice little boost, so it helps me out. But, it's all up to you. I'm not saying Vivid is better. I'm not saying standard is better, but it's just basically your own opinion. So use what you want. Try them out. See what you like. This camera will also shoot in black and white, but I don't recommend it because then your images will come out black and white. And I think the raw image comes out black and white as well. And that means that your raw negative is going to be black and white, and you won't be able to add color. So I would just use monochrome in your processing when you're processing your image. All right, so we're out of picture control. Let's go into manage picture control. So what is manage picture control? Let's see what this thing says. Adjust custom picture controls to C1 to C9. Save, edit, create a new custom picture control based on existing preset or custom picture control contrast saturation. Okay, so that's basically if you adjust your picture control. So if I was going to go in here and then I was going to go into vivid and then I would basically edit these settings, then your custom mode change settings will be lost. Okay, yeah, I don't care. I'm gonna go back here. Let's see. Anyway, this is gonna basically let you save or edit, save the settings that you made or edit them. So that's handy. Your color space. I always shoot an Adobe camera. Adobe Camera Raw. Adobe RGB because it's the biggest color space. If you want, I don't know. I don't use sRGB because it won't give me the most out of my picture. Honestly. See, it says choose for images that will be printed or displayed with no further modification. So that's if you want to just print your pictures right from camera and you don't care about editing them or anything. And I don't recommend that because when you're taking your images, if you want the flexibility to change your images, then you can with your Adobe RGB. Now I even tell you on here, I believe, Adobe RGB has wider gamut than sRGB. And a gamut color space, the bigger the gamut color space, the better, so then you have more flexibility, of course. Alright, so let's go into active delighting. I have that off. If you'd like to turn it on, you can. It improves the level of detail and highlight and shadow areas under the high contrast conditions. At settings other than off, the contrast and brightness items in the picture control menu will be adjusted automatically, and the number of pictures that can be taken in a single burst will be reduced. So basically, it gives you different kinds of highlights in your image, and it will actually brighten your image a little bit. Now, I don't like it because it's not a natural manipulation. So long exposure noise reduction. I don't use that either because I feel like it will de-sharpen my images, and it probably will tell you reduces noise at shutter speeds over 8 seconds. The time needed to record images increases by 1.5 to 2 times. So yes, I've always known noise reduction to reduce any sharpness. Now it does take away noise, but yeah, you won't have the clarity that you want if you're shooting a long exposure. So I don't use that. Now you can try it, see how you like it. If you like it, hey, great, you know. Let's see, high ISO noise reduction. I have it set to normal because, and this isn't a bad idea to have on. In fact, I might even turn it to high if I have to use it like an ISO 800, because this sensor isn't as big as some of the newer sensors. It is a 12 megapixel sensor, and it will give you some noise when you're using higher ISOs. So say it is an 800 ISO, you're going to definitely see some noise. ISO 100, no. 200, no. 320, I think it goes 320. You're going to definitely start to see a little bit of noise. 400, yes, and so on. This is a cool setting. I love this. I actually have this set on my D7000. This is where you can set your ISO. Let's just set this thing to Let's set it to 400 max, okay? And what this does is it automatically racks up your ISO in dark conditions. And this is a fun little feature. So see, maximum sensitivity 400, minimum shutter speed. It will actually set your shutter speed as well when you're in a darker situation, which is nice. But you can actually set it up, to where you would actually have an auto setting. And that's kind of a cool thing. I like to shoot in a lower ISO. Always try to shoot into L1 on this camera, or 200, depending on what it is. And 400 is the max I would ever go on this camera because of the sensor. And that might even be a little bit too much as well. But just so you know, this does have an auto ISO setting. I always try to shoot in the manual mode because then I know I'm going to get a good picture. So I do have this turned off. But if you are getting into low light situations, I would say, hey, go ahead and give this a try. See how you like it. Okay. Live view mode. Live view mode. I don't believe I've used this. Let's see what it is. Choose handheld or tripod according to shooting conditions. Okay, that's funny. So if I go into live view mode, let's see what it says for handheld. Handheld, preview your subject in the monitor. Okay. Press the LV button to view the subject in the monitor. Press the shutter release button all the way down to take a picture. Okay, now it's tripod. Oh. Tripod, use when precise focus is required. Press the LV button to view the subject in the monitor. Use the multi-selector to select the focus point. Press AF on button to check focus. Then press the shutter release button all the way down to shoot. Okay. All right, multiple exposure mode. Let's see what that says. I don't think I've ever used it. Okay, record the specific number of shots as a single image. If no operations are performed for 30 seconds, shooting will end and a multiple exposure will be created from any shots that have been taken. So that's okay. So that's basically if you want a double exposure. If you want two images put into one, that's kind of a cool art feature on this camera. I've never tried it, to be honest. I didn't even know this camera had it. But I would say that is kind of a cool thing if you want to mix two images or one, or maybe more than that, because it says you can take multiple pictures. Hence the multiple exposure wording there. Anyway, that's something fun if you want to try it. Movie settings. Now, this camera shoots in, I believe, 720p, which is interesting. It is an older version of recording on these cameras to shoot in video. Now, as you can see, if I go into quality, it will only give me 720. And then I can set my microphone, of course, to auto sensitivity and things like that. But just so you know, it has it if you want to try it for fun. I believe you do have the manual focus. Interval timing shooting. Now, this is for time lapses. This camera will do a time lapse, which I think is pretty amazing. This camera, I've never tried it with this camera, but it does have it. You can set your time lapse mode. And if you guys want a video on this, I will learn how to do it and make a video on it so then you can see how it works. Okay? Because it is a little complicated, but I know I can figure it out and show you. And I think it would be fun to try because, you know, look at time lapses of what people do. They're pretty amazing. So, yeah, if you guys want a video on that, please let me know in the comments. Let's see here. Let's go back into my menu, shooting menu, bank. That's the same one. Okay, so we're done with that. Now we're gonna go into the little pencil. Now this is a lot of stuff, guys. So write this down on a piece of paper. on what settings you like and go ahead and give them a try. That's what I recommend. Or you can just go ahead and go back into this video and look at it if you'd like. That way you get an idea what you like to set your camera to. So let's get into this. So first we're going to go to autofocus. There are so many modes for autofocus, so many different things that you can try. And what I recommend is just using it. I mean, these are all preferences of how you shoot as a photographer. So if I want to do AFC, which is continuous priority selection. Okay, so that's if I want to use autofocus continuous, and that's if I'm using my camera in a high, fast-paced environment, say for sport photography. I can, if I want it to just focus on it, let's see, hold on. Okay, so if I hold this down, I'll show you. Choose from release and focus. Release, the shutter can be released even when the camera is not in focus. Release plus focus, priority is given to shutter release, but the camera gives greater priority to focus than frame rate when in continuous release mode. Focus, the shutter can only be released once the camera has focused. I think focus, let's see, oops, got out of it, hold on. Okay, so I have it on release. Let's go to, wow. Let's go to focus, I think, because I want the image to be focused when I shoot the picture. If I'm in continuous, I don't want a blurry image. The other one is like, okay, so I'm gonna hit the trigger. I'm gonna let it just do its thing, and then I'm gonna click it. And that's just from what I get with that, because I think it would really be handy if you're using it for sports. I don't do sports. I just use my camera for just images that are not moving really, landscapes. Sometimes it's more flowers, different landscapes, seascapes, things like that. Things that aren't really moving really that fast. So that's something you can think about. Of course, you know, guys, remember this. These are all just preferences, so you can do whatever you like. Now, if I'm using it in a autofocus single priority selection, now let's see what this one says. So choose from release and focus. Release, the shutter can be released even when the camera is not in focus. I don't want that. I want it to focus, so I have it in focus. So we'll keep it there, okay? Dynamic area, autofocus area. I like to use as many points as I can. So then, because I do like to use the single point autofocus, and that's where I can choose my selection. That way I can also use my camera to even focus stack, or if I want to use it for selecting a certain focal point in my image. It helps me basically put my image together, and it gives me that ability to just keep also my camera in a tripod position and not have to move it around too much. That way I have that extra focal point, which is nice. So autofocus does a pretty good job. Manual focus does okay if you have good eyes. If you really know. And your camera will help you understand what's in focus and not, because it has a little green dot in the viewfinder, which is nice to tell you what's focused, what's not. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and go into our focus tracking with lock on. This is if you lock your focus point. It's a little complicated for me because I don't use that. But this is if you would like to. Here, I'll just give you the definition from the camera itself so you guys can see. Go into that and okay, choose how long the camera waits before adjusting focus in response to sudden changes in the distance to the subject. Choose long, normal, or short to delay refocusing when the subject is blocked by an object moving in front of the lens. Choose off when shooting a series of subjects at different distances from the camera. Okay, so what this mode is good for when you're shooting images is if you are having a locked focus. Say you have a focus that, or not a focus. So say if you have a subject that is standing still or a subject that isn't moving, and then something walks or gets in front of the image and then goes away, so like a car or something, then you can set it to where it doesn't autofocus very quickly. So then you can do long, normal, or short, or just have it off completely. That's what that is for. That's kind of handy if you do use focus lock, which I'd say, give that a try. That's a good thing if you're doing portraits or something. Okay, so let's go into our next mode, autofocus activation. So this is choose which controls can be used to focus camera. Shutter, AF on, both the shutter release button and AF on button can be used to focus the camera. So that's if I want to use this button right here to focus with, or if I just want to use the shutter to focus with. So that's kind of a thing too. If you don't want to accidentally hit the shutter button, that's great. Autofocus point illumination. That's if I want my autofocus point in my viewfinder to turn red. Autofocus or focus point wrap around. Choose whether focus point selection using the multi-selector wraps around from one edge of the display to the other. I have that turned off. So if I wrap it, choose whether focus point selection. Alright guys, so what this means in Nikon terms, when they say wraparound, it just means that when you have a selection focus point, when you are picking your own focus point, you basically are able to hold down the D-pad and go from one point of the viewfinder when you're looking, or on live view if you're using live view, and you're able to move your selection point in one direction. It will just keep going and going, so then you don't have to go to the other side of the D-pad and push that button and go to the other side. So basically it'll just flow. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying, is that it just goes from one point to the other automatically. You don't have to hit the other side. It's kind of to make you it's just there for convenience, really. So just thought I'd clarify it. And I have point selection on. I have 51 points. You can choose 11 points, but I have 51. That way I can choose my points of focus. Okay, so I have built-in AF Assist Illuminator. I want that on. And then AF on for MBD10. That is basically if you have the battery pack for this camera, you can hit the button on the bottom of the battery pack. Usually it's the same as a shutter button. That way you can do portrait pictures with that and use that. So that will, if you have a battery pack for this camera, that's what that is for. Next we move on to metering and exposure. Alright, so now we have metering exposure. The first thing you have is ISO sensitivity step value, and I have it set to 1/3 of a step. And when I go into it, basically what I have is third step, half step, and a whole step. And this basically is when I change my ISO sensitivity, say ISO L1 or L7 or 200, or it goes to 300 or 320. Basically it skips that extra thing like ISO 320 and it'll go automatically to ISO 400. So here's an example. if I go a third of a step, this is what happens. Basically, I'm changing it a third of a step, and I get to go in increments. Okay. Now, when I go back into menu and I go into ISO sensitivity and I change it to a half step or a whole step, I'll go back into my info and I'll show you when I hit ISO, it goes to from L1 to 200 to 400. So it just skips it entirely and it just goes in large increments. So that's the difference. So if you like to just skip to a higher ISO, which I don't recommend, because using ISO 200 or anything like that is, I think, necessary with this camera, considering the sensor size. It just works better. And the same goes for EV steps for exposure. If you're changing your exposure, you have your little dots, your little bar inside of your viewfinder. So choose the size of the increments for the shutter speed, aperture, and auto exposure. Basically, you're changing those lines or those bars inside of your viewfinder or on live view in increments of a third, half step, or step. We'll go back into this. All right, next is exposure compensation fine tune. That's where you're doing your plus and minus. Now that's the same exact thing. Basically, you're going to go in a third step, half step, or whole step. You're going to experience the same kind of thing. And exposure compensation is nice when you need it in, say, low or high lit situations. I like exposure compensation for one reason. If I am shooting a picture in snow or anything like that, and I need to lower the highlights a little bit automatically when I have my shutter speeds meter right in the middle and kind of underexposes it. So the next thing that we have is easy exposure compensation, and I have this turned off, and I'll tell you why. So the first thing it says is choose on or on auto reset to adjust exposure compensation without using the exposure compensation button. So that's the plus and minus on top. If on auto reset is selected, only changes to exposure compensation made using easy exposure compensation will be reset when the camera is turned off or the exposure meters turned off. So basically what that means is when you have that on the auto reset, what it's going to do is if you change your compensation and you forget to change it back, it's going to reset it after you turn either the camera off, or if you just leave it alone, like the metering or anything like that, it's going to reset it automatically when you mess with it. So that's kind of a nice thing in case you forget to change it back, because I know I've done that. That's actually a cool thing to have when you mess with your exposure compensation. So if you do mess with it, don't forget to play around with that a little bit. I have it turned off because I like to adjust my compensation myself, and I don't have to worry about it then, but because I know what I used. I have forgotten before, I'm not gonna lie, I have forgotten. So yeah, it's just kind of something to think about. That mode is actually really handy. The next thing we have is center weighted area, and this is when you choose the size of the area given the most weight in the center weighted metering. Regardless of the setting chosen, the size of the area used for non-CPU lenses is fixed at 8mm. So this means if you have an old, say, AI lens that doesn't have autofocus or something like that, what's going to happen is those lenses don't have a CPU, I believe. So what's going to happen is the center weight is going to automatically set it to 8mm. Now you can change it from 6, 8, 10, and 13. Basically what this is doing is it's telling the camera, hey, where do I want my metering to be in? What area of the lens? What area of my the center point where I'm focusing, you know, because you're metering your light basically on the center of your focal point. Okay, so this is just saying, hey, how many millimeters do I want, you know? And that's kind of handy. But the set one is I have it set for 10 to give it kind of a moderate thing. Now you can set it higher if you wanted to have a more wider range of metering, but I like to have mine a little more pinpointed, so that I can actually, it's not 6, it's not the lowest, but you know, I want to have a kind of a mid-range so then I can, you know, do the adjustments properly. I think that works right. I think 10 works really good with that. The next one is fine-tune optimal exposure. What this is a customize the optimal exposure for each metering method. This adjustment is not reset when a 2-button reset is performed. Okay, so what that is exposure compensation. This is so you can fine-tune your optimal exposure. I haven't really used that much. It says customize the optimal exposure for each metering method. Yeah, so I don't use it. I have it set from default what it came with the camera. Let's go into it. Exposure compensation icon is not displayed when the exposure is altered from the default value. Continue, yes. Okay, so in your camera you have different metering modes. Okay, you have at the top you have the spot, you have the center weight, and you have the matrix. All these can be adjusted and it can be fine-tuned. I don't like to mess with it because I think, from what I can tell, the camera can do a pretty good job for itself. I've never messed with that. I just keep it the way it came with my camera. Now you can try playing with those if you want, but just remember that the set value was at 0 when you were messing with it. That way you know what it was. Alright, so in the C setting, timers and AE lock, the first one we're going to go over is shutter release button AEL, which is basically auto exposure lock. And so what this is that little button on the back of your camera, but what it does is this setting turns it on so you can use it in your shutter release instead. So then say you have a composition that you want or a subject in your composition, what you're going to do is you're going to hold down your shutter, and it's not only going to keep the focus that you want, but it's also going to keep the exposure that you have as well. So say you have a subject in your frame that you want to take a picture of, and what it's going to do is it's going to enable you to keep the same exposure and focus on the other subject in your frame as well, or in a different area wherever you're at. So then you can take a picture with the same focus and exposure. So that's kind of handy. So then you don't have to change your exposure. It is great for panoramas, and it's just great for any kind of photography where you need the same lighting. That way you can match. So I would say it's great for you know, creating your composition in different ways, and when you need to move your camera around, it just works. So that's a good thing to try out. I have it off because I don't use it, but I would turn it on if I'm doing a certain kind of photo, say a panorama. So that's always good to try. Alright, so now we're going to be talking about the auto meter off delay. This is basically just a little setting. It is the timer of the meter inside of your viewfinder, and it will go away after a certain amount of time. I have mine set to 6 seconds because I don't need it always on. You can have it always on if you'd like to. It really doesn't matter. I think 6 seconds is actually the default that it comes with in the factory, so I just left it. But you can change all the way to 10 minutes or no limit at all. And to be honest, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have your meter on all the time, you know, when your camera is on. I think it it doesn't hurt one bit. But to some, it might be annoying, so that's how you would change it. Self timer mode. We have the monitor off delay, which I'm actually going to set mine to be longer because my monitor keeps going off. And you can use it with playback, you can do the menus or anything like that. So this camera is very customizable. So we're now in shooting display menu. The first thing you're going to do is beep. Beep is high, low, or off. You can choose that when you're going to use your single autofocus mode, and just it's a preference really. Next thing we have is viewfinder grid display. That's great for your horizon line, just to basically level it out if you want. You also have the digital on your live view, but I also like the grid display for to measure the rule of thirds and to create my composition. Viewfinder warning display on is always great to have on. Screen tips, yes indeed. And I also like to have you can. The nice thing about continuous low mode for shooting speed, when you're shooting continuous, in low, you can actually adjust how fast you want to shoot an image in a sequence. So that's nice. So I have it set to 7. Max continuous release, I have it set to 100. That basically is choose the maximum number of shots that can be taken in a single burst mode in continuous release mode. So 100 images. I don't know. It depends on the memory card. If you have a good memory card, it can do that. If your memory card has a low buffer rate, then it probably can't do that all at once very quickly. Let's see what else we got. We got file sequence number. I like to have that on. And information display, definitely have that on. And LCD illumination, I have that off so my illumination isn't always turned on the top of my camera. I don't want to waste my battery, so I keep that turned off. And then my, let's see, exposure delay mode. Exposure delay mode is choose on to delay shutter release until about 1 second after the mirror is raised. This reduces the effects of vibration caused by raising the mirror. So what this is if you are taking a nighttime picture or a picture where you have a slow shutter speed, this is great to have on, so then you don't get that much vibration from your mirror. Now it's just a delay. You take the picture, it exposes it, and then after it exposes it and takes a picture, then your mirror will shut. So it's kind of it is a delay. Your picture is going to go a lot slower, but that's exactly what it does. Okay, so just kind of give you a little idea how that works. I don't use it, but if you're shooting a long exposure, so maybe shooting stars, then then that could be something you might want to use. MBD 10 battery type. I don't have a battery pack, and if you do, that's what you're going to use. And then you can also set your battery order from your battery pack to your battery instead. And flash. Bracketing and flash. So flash is not something I really use in my photography. I don't take a lot of portraits, nor have I used it much in my photography like ever. So I don't use it. Those are just the settings that I have. They basically came with the camera, and the most I've ever done is used a separate flash from this camera, and that was when I shot a wedding once, but I don't do portraits really, so that was kind of an interesting experience for me because it was different. I mostly use bracketing with this camera, if anything. Bracketing is for HDR photography, and so when you're doing bracketing, you want to do the highlights, the darks, and the midtones. So this camera has auto bracketing, so you can choose the setting varied when auto bracketing is used in manual exposure mode. The settings that can be varied depend on the option selected for auto bracketing set. See the camera's user manual for details. So there are more details in the manual if you want to check it out. It's online. You can find it anywhere. You can go to bracketing order and just do midtones under, which is underexposed and over. To be honest, I like it so it's in sequence. So it's under mid-tones and over. That's what I like right there, because then it's in sequence and I don't have to adjust it when I put it in Photoshop or anything like that when I do the automation mode. So that's something I think about. Controls. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about in the controls function menu is the switch. Now I have it set to LCD backlit, so I just turn on the LCD backlit. But you know what? Now that I look at this, I kind of want to switch it, and I think it would be cool because I didn't realize that in this mode you can also switch it to so where when you use your switch that's on top of your camera, which is where your shutter release is, you can turn it on to where your LCD comes on and your back screen comes on to show you the info. So that I think is very handy, especially when you just want to see what your settings are. If you just want to, pop your eye away from your viewfinder, I think having the LCD come on and seeing your info screen is actually important. So I kept it on switch, but if you guys want to put it on the other mode, that's a cool little function. I'm just used to switch. Anyway, the multi-selector center button is just basically the center button. You can tell it what to do. I like to keep everything the way it came because I'm used to each Nikon that I have. I have a few Nikon cameras, so I don't want to mess up my thinking. I don't want to reprogram these buttons. All these buttons on the back of this camera are actually pretty programmable. You can tell it what to do, what the buttons should do. I mean, basically you can customize almost every button on this thing that's on the back of the camera. Almost everyone. It's like the selector buttons you can control. There's actual buttons on the front of the camera you can actually put for certain functions. There's a lot of customization on this camera. I just like to keep everything the way it came, OEM, because I am used to that. That's what I'm used to, and that's what Nikon. That's how I've learned. I learned the Nikon menu system. So if I mess it up, it's just going to cause me bigger problems. The function buttons in the front are nice, though. There's one that I do like to have assigned as a depth of field button, so that I can do a preview in my viewfinder to see what the image turns out like. So basically it adjusts the aperture on the lens so that I can see what the image is gonna basically. I'm basically previewing the image a little bit, which is nice. So I have that button set to preview. And then there's another button on top you can also customize as well in the front. There's two buttons. So this camera is full of customization ability. Is that a word? It might be a word. If it's not, I just made it up. But I think, for anyone who wants to maybe, put different functions that they're used to on some of their Nikons on this camera, you can definitely do that if it has a feature in the menu, of course. So that's just something to consider. For being such an old camera, this camera actually has a lot of features. So this camera, with the functions and the controls and everything like that, you can assign different buttons, and this camera actually has more setting customization than the Nikon D7000. From what I can tell in the menu, the menu has a larger selection. I'm gonna have to go back in my Nikon D7000 and check it out because I feel like that. Yeah, this is considered a semi-pro camera. So since it is considered that semi-pro camera, it should have more features. It should. And that makes sense. It makes total sense. So if you can see some of these functions, there's a lot. I use bracketing. On the side there where the flash is, there's also a button. And you can customize that for flash. But this is all just preview buttons. These are basically all the things you can customize, all the buttons that are available. Not all the buttons, but most of the buttons. The assign preview button, or the buttons on the front. There's a few buttons on the back. You can assign them different functions. And there's a lot of different functions you can assign each one to. Especially the AEL. The AEL button you can assign something else to. Doesn't have to be AEL. Customize dial buttons. I don't want to do that. So just leave it. If I mess with it, I'm gonna mess myself up and really confuse myself. It's unnecessary of how many different things you can change on here. And if you do the wrong thing, you'll end up having to do a factory reset on this camera because you could really confuse yourself a lot. The reverse indicator, it can be nice. So I know in my Nikon D60, the indicators were reversed. So that's a nice little feature that this camera has. If you are used to using your metering backwards compared to the other way or something, then that will work. And that's it. Alright, setup menu. So we have format memory card, LCD brightness. So you basically can turn the brightness up or turn the brightness down depending on what you like to see your image, how you see your images and how you see your menu. That's nice. You can adjust that. You'll also have clean image sensor, lock mirror for cleaning, and of course this is how you change your HDMI auto mode. I think that's when you just plug it in. So for HDMI with this, you can actually plug your camera into your TV so that you can actually view your images, which is nice. So you have to use an HDMI mini though, a mini plug. So that's something. I like to have this camera when I'm using clean image sensor. I like to have it to where when I turn my camera on, it actually cleans it. Lock mirror is for also cleaning your sensor, but that's when you're blowing out your camera with an air blower. Video mode, it just you want to change this depending on the country that you're living in. Since I live in USA, it's going to be NTSC. HDMI, that's the output, so I do 1080p, which is the highest. Image comment, it's not really that important to me. Auto image rotation on, I use that, so it rotates my images automatically. Battery info, that is basically going to tell you your battery age and how much battery you have left for that battery. Like, it'll tell you what that battery is capable of doing. So right now I have pretty good battery. Image authentication, I like to use a copyright info, just put my name in there. That way it automatically goes in every time on each image. GPS, there's an adapter for this camera. Here's the virtual horizon, so it'll show you where your horizon is when you're setting up a shot. Let's see, non-CPU lens data, AF fine tune. Now, okay, so let's do this first. Non-CPU lens data. This is basically telling you the lens, the focal length, and everything like that. It's just the data for the lens. AF fine tune. Now, AF fine tune, I did a whole video on, so please check out in the description. I'll put the link in the description below, and also at the end of this video you can also find the link. Go ahead and click on that. This is basically a video that's going to show you how you fine-tune your focus on your lens. So say if you have a film lens or a newer lens that's not communicating well with your camera, you want to use AF fine-tune to definitely tune your lens appropriately so that the CPU on the lens can communicate with your camera. So go ahead and check out my video. I do a whole entire tutorial on this, and I actually give you a little download sheet you can check out as well to help you do this. Okay, this is really important. I have, with the D7000 especially, this has helped me a ton with my focusing issues. Unfortunately, the D7000 has some communication issues with the older lenses, maybe even some newer lenses. I've actually had some problems with the newer lenses as well, I'm not gonna lie. It's a glitch that they never fix with firmware. So this is a manual way of fixing it. It is your own way of fixing it, so it's a little bit trial and error. You might have to adjust it a little bit, but go ahead and check out the video. I'll put it in the description. Okay, this is your firmware version. That's how you look it up in your setup menu, and that's it. And then my menu, and that's it, guys. That's all for the menu settings. Yeah, that's it. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comments, okay? And if you need any more guidance or anything, I'll be more than happy to help you. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and give me a heads up if you feel like you need some more clarity. Okay, also please check out my other videos in my profile. That'd be great, and I appreciate all you guys for watching and all my awesome subscribers. And just so you know, these are little selection modes for your focal points. That's how you change your selection on your focal points, or your autofocus points. So that's something to keep in mind too. I forgot about that right there. Little knob on the right hand side, the bottom of the camera. Yeah. Alright guys, please take care. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you for watching.